A winch is probably the easiest form of insurance for your overlanding rig. And here are 5 things you should do to keep your winch healthy. Now let's get this thing started. Hey guys, my name is Carl, and this channel is dedicated to all things DIY for your 2nd-gen Toyota Tacoma. And for those of you guys who are new to this channel, I have a 2009 Toyota Tacoma TRD Sport, fully locked with 488 gears and 35-inch tires. And I do have a 4-wheel camper that I remove from time to time when I do some hard wheeling.
Oh my god.
Now I've had this Smittybilt 9500 XRC winch for roughly about 3 years now. And this year I decided to take it apart and inspect its health. And if you want this same exact winch, it will be linked in the description below. If you've never taken apart a winch, make sure you stick around till the end of the video because I do get into tips and tricks when it comes to disassembly and reassembly. Now let's get right into it. Now the first tip is definitely check the seals and check the gaskets on your winch. You would want to inspect for tears, dry rot, or any damage on any of those seals. If you go into the manual, there's usually a parts breakdown. Just in case you need to replace them, you should be able to pull the part number and order it from the manufacturer. So tip number 2 is to check your gear system on your winch. Now these winches are usually built with an electric motor on one side and a planetary gear system on the other side. So when you take the planetary gear system apart, if there's any signs of water getting into it, you'd want to take it apart and let it dry out. Remove any water and clean up any of the dirt and debris that you do see and find. And once it's all dried out and cleaned up, reseal that planetary gear assembly and repack with your heavy-duty wheel bearing grease. And the grease I do recommend in this video will be linked in the description below. So number 3 would be to inspect your winch cable. And it will definitely be easiest to unspool the whole drum and have that cable laying on the ground so you can inspect it. We got damage here, and we have a pretty bad kink right here. And if your cable looks good, it would definitely be a good idea to spray down the cable with some fluid film to prevent future corrosion. Now when you do get to respooling your winch cable, make sure you pre-tension it so that it doesn't get tangled up the next time you use it. And I'll show you that now. So here's the current setup, guys. I have my truck semi-uphill, front wheel chocked, e-brakes engaged. There's my daily, slight downhill from the truck, so we should have a little bit of resistance when we're pulling it. So now let's just start engaging the first few wraps of this winch. So at least with this, I can feed the cable right through the Fairlead. So we'll just screw that in. Now these first few wraps will be done without too much tension. This is just tension by hand. All right, I probably got about 7 wraps around that drum, which should be enough. And also, I did sand the drum to make sure there's no burrs there. This is a brand new Fairlead, so there's no burrs there either. I got the rest of the winch cable, and I'll try to unspool it as neatly as possible, so I don't want this thing tangled up. So now I'm just gonna twist it from my end here to counteract the twist when I pulled it straight. So I'm just making sure there's no twists in the cable. Looks like it's just a little bit more, guys. There we go. So my girlfriend is in the car, and all I'm doing is making sure this cable is wrapping around neatly around this drum. There you go. All right, guys, so for this final 15 feet, I'm not putting any tension since you really don't need to put tension on those final wraps of rope, since it'll probably be pulled out that far when you are getting winched. Yeah, just gotta make sure you don't pinch your fingers here, guys. So last little bit left. And I do have this winch hook isolator that I'm putting on here to clean it up a little bit. If you want one, I am selling it at my store. Just tighten it up a little bit. There we go. Look at that, guys. That new winch hook isolator looks great. Definitely cleans up that front end. I used to have the hook actually hooked on and stowed on that corner, that lower left corner stow point. And it works, but it will rattle. So this will further prevent it from rattling in the highway, as well as really clean up the look of the front end, and we're not gonna have the cable dangling around. So I'm very happy with this. All right, just a few things real quick. I know with synthetic winch rope, there's a little bit of a debate whether or not I should be using the Hawse Fairlead. These are brand new rollers. They're a little bit stained from some of the chemicals I had in the garage, but these are brand spanking new. So you can see they're rolling real nicely. There's no burrs, no damage at all. So this shouldn't damage the rope. And I will be linking a video down below regarding the Hawse versus the regular Fairlead roller when it comes to pairing it with synthetic rope. And I'll let you guys make the argument, because I do have a Hawse Fairlead in my office right now. But I'll test this out. I'll tell you guys how well it performs. But overall, I mean, this thing looks great. So tip number 4 would be to inspect your rotor and stator on the electric motor side of your winch. Here's the rotor for the electric motor side. We'll definitely want to go around and inspect the windings to make sure there's no corrosion, no water damage, no rust. And as you can see, everything here still looks really good. There's no cracks on any of the metal parts, as well as the contact brushes here. And here is the stator side. We'd want to look for damage here as well and see if there's any crack, rust, any type of blemishes that might look like it's been burned. So this one on this side looks good. We would also want to check the terminals to see that none of them is loose, and this is rock solid. And judging by the fact that it's very dry inside, this has not gotten any water inside. Now the last thing we'd want to check on this housing is definitely these are called brushes. These are the graphite carbon contact brushes that makes contact with the rotor portion. What you'd want to make sure is that there's still plenty of this material in here, because otherwise you will have to replace this. And typically, if you look at the schematic, the diagram of the whole assembly, you should be able to get the part number for this if any of these are cracked, damaged, or if it's worn down completely. So now let's work on assembling this thing. For this housing to mate with the rotor portion of the body, we'll have to line up these pins. There are these alignment pins, and if you have any specific orientation for this, you have to make sure that you're aligning them properly. And to be honest, it's definitely much easier to put the gasket on this side of the body first instead of the housing, because it will get pinched if it's on the stator housing. So I like to just put this, flush it up against the bottom here, get the alignment holes to line up right there on the bottom. And then this is where it gets a little bit tricky. Not many people know about assembling an electric motor. Now I'm going to take the stator housing and then just place it on top. And this is where people get hung up. See these brushes here, you'll have to pull them back. Get past that bearing first.
And then you'll have to get past the contact points too. So push these back with your finger, but with one brush at a time. So we take our tool, push that last one to get past the contact point for the brush. And then now it's completely loose. And since I'm supporting it from the bottom, I can line up that final alignment pin. Should just slide right in, just like that, guys. And here is the housing cover for that electric motor. Typically there is some type of spring washer. This spring washer sits in there just like that. But we don't want to pick up this whole thing and then put it on top of the rotor housing, because that spring washer will just drop and it will probably short something. So what we would want to do is pick up the whole rotor and stator assembly and then just bring this whole assembly on top of the cap. Now I know that there's screw holes here, so we'll just orient this as best as we can. I know that these two holes are perpendicular to these two mounts on the body. So let's do that now. Let's take that, just lay it on top. There we go. Now we can put the whole thing back onto its opposite side. Just like that. And here we can freely spin the cap. And this is where we make sure that when we put the screws in, I'm going to try to ride the outside of the housing and then look for the hole that way. There we go. Felt the hole drop in. And that's definitely snug in there. The same thing on the other side. Just feel it out. That dropped in. And this I'm just snugging down with a 10mm socket. There we go. Now it would definitely be good to repack some wheel bearing grease in this area here.
And last but not least, tip number 5 would be to wire brush any loose paint or scale that you see on the housing of the winch. Any of this loose paint or scale actually holds moisture and will cause more corrosion damage. So it's definitely good to just wire brush it as much as you can, especially if it's made of aluminum. With aluminum, it's already naturally corrosion resistant. So you can paint it after you're done. And what I did with the whole winch is actually coat the whole thing with fluid film. And this is probably something I'll do every year now, right before the salt spray, to make sure that the housing stays healthy. Now here are some final tips when it comes to disassembly and reassembly of your winch. You'll definitely want to refer to the manual because it shows the exploded view of your winch. Just in case you lose track, refer to it. And keep your work site clean. Take apart one side at a time first. Start with probably the rotor and stator assembly, which is the electric motor side. And then once you completely take it apart and put it together, then move to the gear assembly side. Check for any types of alignment pins if things don't seem to line up when you're putting them together. Now you don't necessarily need to take off the ARB bumper in order to remove the winch. I was able to access everything from the bottom by removing the skid plate, and I took off the winch in pieces. And this is similar to the idea when I removed and installed the starter on my truck. Since the clearances were so tight, having it in pieces makes it a little bit more maneuverable and a little bit easier to install and remove. Now when you have your winch sitting out on your workbench, be ready to have it sit on there for several days, because shipping might take a little while. You can check eBay, you can check Amazon, and you could even check Google Shopping in order to find and source the parts which will ship the fastest. And remember, at worst case scenario, if the amount of damage that you see is really significant, then be also ready to replace it and buy a new winch.
Now this next tip is very specific to this winch. There is this mechanism here that goes and mates with the inner gear portion that you see. So the mechanism sits right inside there. It almost looks like two spur gears on top of the other. But this has a female end to it. You can see here. So this needs to mate properly, because if it's mated properly, you should be able to spin it. So you can see I'm spinning it by hand. Now, if it's off, where I'll show you real quick, I'll back that up, and this tooth mates on the wrong side, like there, then this whole thing won't spin freely. See that? And if you try to run the winch, it will end up just seizing up on you. Don't ask me how I know. So yeah, make sure that this little keyed piece is in the proper orientation. Just like that. And that mechanism inside is called the internal brake assembly. Now what I'm going to do here is actually put the electric motor right on top. I did place the gasket here right on top because I know that that spur gear is sitting properly. So just like that, flip it upside down. I'll take this section out. There we go. And the reason I did that is because I don't want that mechanism to pop out when I'm trying to put this back onto the truck. Now I removed this winch in pieces. Let's see if we can get it installed in pieces as well. That's why I put that little spur gear ahead of time. Bottom screw in, the top in. All right, that's one side. All right, now let's see if we can get this other side in. This one will be a little trickier. There we go. Now we can put on these cross beams. And right now I do have the hardware that's mounting it on the bumper fairly loose, so there's still some play. So I could adjust if need be. Been installed. And they're also finger tightened for now. So the back is already tightened completely, those two back cross beams. So now I'm going to raise this up just a tiny bit so that the bolts aren't completely flush to the bottom and that I have a little bit of play here because I am going to put in the Fairlead. So I tighten that side, tighten up this side. Loosen this a little bit, as we want as much play as possible on the bottom. See that? Those bolts are loose, because we will be mounting the Fairlead on those lower bolts. I'll just hand tighten this to ensure this doesn't drop, break my fingers. I'll take off these lower ones. All right, guys, the truck is running. I have the winch roughly wired together so that we can test it. We definitely don't want to button everything up just in case there's some issues and we'll need to pull it out. This will be a little bit easier, but hopefully there's not. So I'm going to cycle through the winch. As you can see, cycling through properly. Nothing's getting hot. You just want to feel out those terminals too. All right, everything feels good, guys. So now I'm just gonna shut it off, undo all my wiring, and then just button everything up nice and neatly.
And if you're still completely not comfortable with taking your winch apart, you can still brush off any scale and rust. Apply some corrosion protection on the surface, as well as unspool the cable to inspect that for damage as well. So that's pretty much it for this video, guys. Make sure you smash that like and subscribe button for more DIY tips for your second-gen Toyota Tacoma. And I want to wish you all Merry Christmas and Happy Holidays. Until next time, peace out, everybody.